So I'm Kevin Corcoran. I am from Sacramento originally. Been living in San Francisco the last 10 and a half years. I graduated from UC Davis with my undergrad in a program called Technocultural Studies, kind of an experimental program bringing art and theory and art and science collaboration together. After a long break, I'm now back at university. I'm at UC Santa Cruz. And this quarter, I'm finishing my MFA in the Environmental Art and Social Practice program. My current practice is, I tend to say it's primarily sound-based. I have a background as a musician. Started playing drums when I was 13, so that was my kind of main interest in music practice, and played in rock bands, and got pretty interested in like the local music scene, and was going out all the time to listen to music and study through listening to other musicians, try to kind of replicate that and learn to play music that way. And that's what got me interested in listening as a practice, and then also in sound recording in a more environmental context. So trying to get out of the context of like controlling every sound that's produced with an instrument, and rather listening to surroundings, whether that's an urban space or a wild space or something in between. And yeah, so I tend to say primarily I'm sound-based, but my work does also include photography and video and text, and sometimes like found object sculptural work. So it's a bit of a mixed media approach, but sound and listening is always the entry to the project, or the kind of main media that I'm thinking through that concept with. My practice tends to start in the field, and my musical background is very much focused in improvisation. I come to environmental sound in the same sort of way. Like, I don't want to overproduce an idea for what a place should sound like or what I think a place sounds like. It's more about that improvisational relationship with place, and then over time kind of learning what pathways lead me through listening, and what landmarks are interesting visually, but then, trying to think what is the relationship of sound to that visual landmark. The interest I have in land use, definitely, like what are these visual boundaries, but then how can we trace those visual boundaries through some kind of sonic mapping. The intentions of doing the field work, I grew up camping all the time. Like, my family was a very outdoors oriented family. My dad was a park ranger at first. And so we grew up going to this area called Hope Valley. And so I wanted to get some audio equipment so I could start to record this place. I thought, like, this is the place that makes sense to start collecting recordings. Like, I've gone here many times, I know it well, I've taken many photographs. So at that time I got a mini disc recorder and some binaural microphones, just doing some like research online at what kind of equipment I should use. And yeah, so I was making recordings of like the Carson River and wind in the grasses. I moved from this more diaristic practice of recording the ambiance around me to thinking about what are the sounds that are not immediately apparent in a place, but still very much part of that place. And so, for instance, putting a contact microphone on a hollow plant like a fennel stalk, you can hear the rush of wind inside the stalk of the fennel, almost like a flute without any holes. So you start to get these overtones that are not something you hear in your open ear and location, or putting a contact mic on a metal bridge railing as the sun is coming up, for example, like that will allow you to hear these cracking and popping sounds inside the metal as it expands with the change in the temperature. And so this kind of experimentation with different microphone types is just something that's been an ongoing part of the field work from a young age. And so I think now I'm at a point where I can start to make those decisions as I go out somewhere and look around. And this gets back to that kind of question of indexing the boundaries of a site, and like how can we listen to those boundaries, for example, with these kind of sensors, so that the field recording moves from what's obviously there, like the sounds we're hearing right now in the background of the wind and the birds and the insects and the airplane and the traffic, but also to the sounds that are in the soil or in the physical infrastructure of the site. So we have some windy conditions out here in the old remnants of the telegraph architecture, and I'm going to hook up some contact mics and see if we can listen to the wind through these wires. I'm really interested in duration, in experiencing duration. And so for me, I don't tend to do things like put a drop rig in the field and leave it running for 24 hours and come back to it. I really like to record while I'm experiencing that condition. And so that becomes part of this practice of like when I'm indexing a place or finding what is my particular relationship to a place, that's actually pretty important for me. What I'm connecting right now is called a geophone. And this is really designed for listening underground. In this way, I think what becomes interesting is how the infrastructure itself becomes like an instrument. I am trying to identify something between a critical and a poetic land-based practice in my works. There is a certain abstractness that happens when the sound is presented in its own form without visual anchors or visual references. I really appreciate that the UC makes space for, doing art at a research university is something that's definitely an intentional decision I'm making, and not going to like an art school, but being able to think about creative practice and critical terms, and to be able to think that with people who are, brilliant minds in other disciplines. I signed up for this class, which was going to the Granite Mountains Mojave Desert Reserve, which is a pretty remote one. And I just really loved this structure, like having a structure of a class that was doing field work in the way that I saw a lot of the physical science classes would do. I didn't know that we could have access to that kind of space in the art department. While recording the wind a few minutes ago, this temporary body of water caught my eye. Just hearing some frogs perk up right now. It's a new voice in this landscape since we've been here. I thought putting a hydrophone into the water will give us another interesting perspective that we haven't heard yet. This is pretty interesting. There's a really intense low frequency pulsing happening. Maybe like a truck that's driving down the highway that I'm hearing from underneath the ground. This kind of sound-based practice where I'm thinking about place and I'm thinking about how to make sound recordings in a way that communicates something critical about landscape and land use, and climate and atmosphere, and the tangling up of sociology and ecology in a sense. That to me just feels like a place where it needs the research. I'm putting up an exhibition right now for my MFA thesis titled Landslip Frequencies, and that's not directly a UC Reserve project. It is a fieldwork project, and I'm working with phenomena of coastal erosion, looking specifically at locations that are simultaneously erosion and accumulation. And so this is just a way to look at like human presence in the land without documenting specifically social subjects, but looking at traces of humans in landscape. And so what I've done in a series of side projects that I'm working on at the UC Reserves is similarly to look at the human traces of making place. And so looking at the boundaries, like basically looking for lines in the landscape, following those lines like scores, so that I'm walking and listening and recording and documenting. Since we were listening to the wind through the wires over here, I noticed that the wind is also being amplified by these cypress trees. I like to mix these kind of layers in my audio compositions, so listening to the wind through this solid structure and then also listening to it in the open air. This is a shotgun microphone, so here we're able to listen to a pretty directional pattern. In this case, I want to listen to the wind, but I don't want to hear the wind actually directly buffer the microphone, so it's that careful balance. Right, that gives us a pretty interesting contrast to the wind and the wires, and starts to give us a picture of this place as coming together as more of a whole rather than an isolated phenomena.